Today, we are going to discuss about the three aspects of Lord Gautama Buddha's dispensation. It's also known as Gautama Buddha Sasana. Now, who is the Buddha? A Buddha is an awakened one, an enlightened one. Enlightened by the realization of the Four Noble Truths. And the Four Noble Truths are the truth of universal suffering, truth of the cause of suffering, truth of the cessation of suffering, and truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering. Now, when Lord Gautama Buddha became a Sambuddha through enlightenment, in his first discourse, the very first sermon called Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, the Buddha described the Four Noble Truths that he realized during the process of enlightenment. The first truth is that there is unavoidable and inevitable universal suffering. And the Buddha said, birth is suffering, aging is suffering, illness is suffering, death is suffering, sorrow, lamentation, grief, pain, despair are suffering. Association with what one dislikes is suffering. Separation from what one likes is suffering. And not getting what one desires is suffering. And Buddha said, in short, the five aggregates of clinging are suffering. Now, according to Buddha's teaching, an individual or person is made up of these five aggregates called form or materiality, that's rupa, feeling, vedana, perception, sanya, mental formations, sankara, and consciousness, vijnana. And the Buddha said, all these factors, aggregates, are nothing but suffering. And the second noble truth is that the origin of suffering is craving, as tanha. And the Buddha describes three types of craving. Craving for sensual pleasures, that's kama tanha. Craving for becoming or existence, bhava tanha. And craving for non-becoming or non-existence, and that is vibhava tanha. And the third noble truth is that the suffering can be eradicated, ceased, and that is the attainment of Nibbana. Nibbana is attained by totally eradicating this craving. And the fourth noble truth, the Buddha described as the path leading to the cessation of suffering, the Buddhist path of liberation. And that Buddha described as the Noble Eightfold Path. And the Noble Eightfold Path, as we know, consists of 8 factors: right view, sammaditthi; right intentions, samma sankappa; right speech, samma vacha; right action, samma kammanta; right livelihood, samma ajiva; right effort, samma vayama; right mindfulness, samma sati; and right concentration, samma samadhi. We will discuss it in detail later on. Now, a Buddha, an enlightened one, is called Bodhi, and that means the realization of the Four Noble Truths. And in the Buddhist literature, 3 types of Buddhas have been described. the Samma Sambuddha, silent Buddha or Pacheka Buddha, and the disciple Buddha or Savaka Buddha. Now, a Samma Sambuddha is one who has realized the Four Noble Truths with his own effort, with no assistance from any teacher. And having become Samma Sambuddha, he is able to preach his doctrine to others so that they can also cultivate the same path of liberation and gain enlightenment. Now, a silent Buddha or Pacheka Buddha also realizes the Four Noble Truths by his own effort with no help from a teacher. But he is unable to preach his doctrine to others so that they can cultivate the same path. And the disciple Buddha, they are the Buddhist disciples who have learned the Buddhist doctrine from Samma Sambuddha, practiced it, and then attained enlightenment. They are also called Arahants. Now, Lord Gautama Buddha was a Samma Sambuddha. And in the Buddhist literature, 28 Samma Sambuddhas have been named. In the present eon, the Kalpa, 4 Samma Sambuddhas have already appeared. Kakusanda Buddha, Konagamana Buddha, Kassapa Buddha, and Gautama Buddha. And it is said that the 5th Samma Sambuddha, named Maitreya, will also appear in the same Kalpa. Now we know Lord Gautama Buddha was born as a Prince Siddhartha in Lumbini, Nepal. He was born into a royal family, so he grew up as a royal prince with all the royal comforts. At the age of 16, he got married. And at 29, his son was born, who was named Rahula. By then, Prince Siddhartha has seen the enormous human suffering that human beings are subjected to. And he also realized that this human suffering is common to everybody, including himself and his loved ones. So he became disillusioned and wanted to live the domestic life and become an ascetic so that he can try and find a way out of human suffering. So at age 29, he left home and became a homeless ascetic. For the next 6 years, he practiced severe austerity and self-mortification, because at that time there was a belief that severe austerity might help one to gain enlightenment. But after 6 years, he realized that severe austerity is not going to bring enlightenment. So he gave it up and started meditating. And at age 35, he enlightened as a Samma Sambuddha in Bodh Gaya in India. And for the next 45 years, he went around India preaching his Buddhist doctrine so that other people can also cultivate the same path and gain enlightenment and liberation from suffering. And Lord Gautama Buddha passed away in Kusinara in India, age 80. Now, a dispensation or Sasana is the doctrine, a teaching, or a legacy of a Samma Sambuddha. A dispensation is usually named after the last Samma Sambuddha. So the current Buddhist dispensation is called Gautama Buddha Sasana. Lord Gautama Buddha's dispensation. There are other interpretations for dispensation. One interpretation is that it describes the period of existence of Samma Sambuddha's doctrine. And doctrine of the present Lord Gautama Buddha is supposed to exist for 5,000 years. There's also another interpretation that the dispensation or Sasana is the community of the Buddhist monastics. That's the Buddhist monks and Buddhist nuns. Now, the Buddha Sasana or the Buddha's dispensation consists of three factors. The first is the theory of the Buddha's doctrine, teaching, and that's called Pariyatti Sasana. The second aspect is the practice of the Buddhist doctrine, and that is Patipatti Sasana. And the third aspect is the realization of the truth, the fruit, the result of practicing the Buddhist doctrine, and it's called Pativeda Sasana. So Pariyatti Sasana, Patipatti Sasana, Pativeda Sasana. Now let us first look at the theoretical aspects, the Pariyatti Sasana. And this is the teaching of the Buddha that we have to study by reading the scriptures or listening to sermons and discourses, and by any other means of learning. Because the correct understanding of the doctrine is essential to practice it properly and correctly to get the expected results. In the Parinibbana Sutta of the Digha Nikaya, that's a collection of the Buddha's long discourses, the Buddha said, "When I am gone, the teaching I have formulated and preached will be your teacher." So Buddha expected us, the disciples, to learn and practice the teaching that the Buddha preached, even if after the Buddha's passing away. And in another discourse called Vakkali Sutta of the Samyutta Nikaya, that's a collection of the Buddha's connected discourses. The Buddha said, "Yo dhammam passati, so mam passati. Yo mam passati, so dhammam passati." One who sees the Dhamma sees me. One who sees me sees the Dhamma. So in order to see the Buddha, that is to gain enlightenment and Buddhahood, to realize the Four Noble Truths, Buddha expected us to learn and practice the Buddha's teaching, the Dhamma. When the Buddha was alive and for up to 3 months after the Buddha's passing away, the Buddha's teaching existed in the form of 9-4 dispensation. It was called Navanga Buddha Sasana. And that was based on the style and the form that the Buddha delivered his teachings. And the 9 aspects were, some were discourses mainly preached in prose, and some of the discourses were mixed prose and verse called Geya. Then elaboration of brief teachings, the Buddha would first describe something in brief and then elaborate it, Vyakarana. And the teaching that was delivered mainly in verses, for example, in Dhammapada, mainly of verses. And then inspired utterances of the Buddha, that's again in verse form. And there were some sayings, like Itivuttaka, they were in mixed prose and verse. And of course, the birth stories, the Buddha's previous life stories. And the 8th aspect was the extraordinary things or miracles performed by the Buddha and senior disciples. And then in the form of question and answers. Vedalla. After the Buddha's passing away, 3 months later, there was a Buddhist council attended by 500 enlightened arahants, and they discussed all of the Buddha's teachings, which consist of 84,000 items. And they were divided into 3 baskets. The basket of the disciplinary rules for the monastics is Vinaya Pitaka, the basket of the discourses, and the basket of the Buddha's higher teaching called Abhidhamma Pitaka. Now, the basket of the disciplinary rules, the Vinaya Pitaka, contains the disciplinary rules for Buddhist monks and Buddhist nuns. There are 227 disciplinary rules for Buddhist monks and 311 disciplinary rules for Buddhist nuns. And they are recorded in 5 books. Major offenses, Parajika Pali. Minor offenses, Pachitya Pali. Greater section, Mahavagga Pali. Lesser section, Chulavagga Pali. And summary and classification called Parivara Pali. And the basket of the discourses, the Sutta Pitaka, contains discourses delivered by the Buddha during the ministry of 45 years. It also contains some discourses delivered by a few of the senior Arahant disciples. And there are over 17,000 recorded discourses in the 5 collections. Collection of the long discourses, Niddiga Nikaya. Collection of middle-length discourses, Majjhima Nikaya. Collection of connected discourses, Samyutta Nikaya. Collection of numerical discourses, Anguttara Nikaya. And collection of minor discourses called Khuddaka Nikaya. And the collection of long discourses, Diga Nikaya, contains 34 discourses. And the collection of middle-length discourses, Majjhima Nikaya, contains 152 discourses. Samyutta Nikaya contains 7,762 discourses. Anguttara Nikaya contains 9,557 discourses, while the collection of minor discourses, Khuddaka Nikaya, consists of 15 books. And they are Khuddaka Patha, Dhammapada, Jataka stories, Udana, Itivuttaka, Sutta Nipata, Vimanavattu, Petavattu, Teragata, Terigata, Niddesha, Patisambhida Magga, Appadana, Buddha Vamsa, and Charya Pitaka. Now, the basket of the higher teachings, the Abhidhamma Pitaka, that contains analysis of the Buddha's higher teachings. In that basket, the Buddha discussed the ultimate realities of all existing physical and mental phenomena. And Buddha described 4 ultimate realities. And that is 1, the mind, the chitta, the mental factors, the cetasika, the material form, rupa. All 3 are conditioned phenomenon. And the 4th is the unconditioned state of nibbana. And the teachings of the Abhidhamma Pitaka are recorded in 7 books. The book of classification, Dhammasangani, the book of analysis, Vibhanga, discussion with reference to elements, as Dhatu Katha, description of individuals, Puggala Pannatti, points of controversy, Kathavattu, the book of pairs, Yamaka, and the book of conditioned relations, that's Pattana. Now, the essence of the Buddha's teaching is, of course, the 4 Noble Truths. And in a discourse called Mahahattipadopama Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, the 4 Noble Truths were compared to the footprint of an elephant. Just like the footprints of all animals who can walk can fit inside an elephant's footprint. And in the same way, all the doctrinal points of the Buddha's teaching can be included in the Four Noble Truths. And the Buddha often said, I teach only two things, suffering and end of suffering. So all aspects of the Buddha's teaching are around suffering and how to end suffering. And of course, in addition to the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, there are other significant concepts like the karma, rebirth, dependent origination, three universal characteristics, Buddhist cosmology, Buddhist meditation, which I am not going to discuss at this talk. Now let us go to the second aspect of the Buddhist dispensation, that's the correct practice of the Buddhist doctrine, Patipatti Sasana. Now for spiritual growth and to realize the Four Noble Truths and to gain enlightenment Nibbana by eradicating all our mental defilements, we have to practice the Buddhist doctrine correctly. Just learning and knowing all of the Buddha's teachings is not going to help anyone to gain the expected spiritual benefits. And in verse 19 of the Dhammapada, the Buddha has said, those who recite many scriptures but fail to practice the teachings, they are like a cowherd counting another's cows because they don't share the joys of the spiritual life. So in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, in the Buddha's first discourse, the Buddhas described the Four Noble Truths. And the fourth Noble Truth is the path leading to the cessation of suffering. And Buddha introduced the path of Buddhist liberation as the Noble Eightfold Path. Buddha also called it the middle path. And they are right view, sammaditthi, right intention, samma sankappa, right speech, samma vacha, right action, samma kammanta, right livelihood, samma ajiva, right effort, samma vayama, right mindfulness, samma sati, and right concentration, samma samadhi. Now, from a practical point of view, these 8 factors can be divided into 3 groups. The first group is the group of morality, that's sila, and that consists of right speech, right action, and right livelihood. And the second group of concentration, samadhi, consisting of right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. And the third group of wisdom, panya, that consists of right understanding and right intention. So, sila, samadhi, and panya. So, Patipatti Sasana is to cultivate the Buddhist path of liberation. That's the Noble Eightfold Path. Now, in the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, Buddha just mentioned the 8 factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, but did not elaborate on them. But in this discourse called Vibhanga Sutta of the Samyutta Nikaya, Buddha explained the 8 factors. The first factor, right view, sammaditthi, is the correct understanding of the Four Noble Truths. That's the truth of universal suffering, the truth of the cause of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering, and the truth of the path leading to the cessation of suffering. The second factor, right intention, samma sankappa, that's right thoughts, right thinking. Buddha described 3 aspects. Right intention of renunciation, nekkhamma sankappa, that's to counter the wrong intention of sensual desires. Second, the right intention of goodwill, loving kindness. That's avyapada sankappa. And that is to counter wrong intention of anger, ill will, aversion. And the third, the right intention of harmlessness, compassion, avihimsa sankappa. And that is to counter the wrong intention of harmfulness. Right speech consists of four aspects. That's to abstain from false speech, to abstain from malicious backbiting or slanderous speech, to abstain from harsh, blameful, hurtful speech, and to abstain from gossip, idle chatter, vain talk. Right action, Samma Kammanta, has three aspects: to abstain from killing any living beings, to abstain from stealing, and to abstain from any sexual misconduct. Right livelihood, Samma Ajiva, that is, one is expected to earn a living by ethical, legal, and honest means. One needs to follow ethical standards and cause no harm to any other living beings, either directly or indirectly. And Buddha has said that for lay people, they need to avoid certain trades. And Buddha described 5 trades: there's trading in living beings, including human beings and animals, trading in arms and weapons, trading in intoxicants like alcohol and drugs, trading in poisons, and trading in meat. Right effort to Sammavayama, there are 4 aspects. To put effort to prevent the arising of unwholesome mental states that have not arisen, to put effort to abandon, to give up unwholesome mental states that may have arisen, to make effort to develop wholesome mental states that have not arisen yet, and to put effort to develop and further maintain any wholesome mental states that have already arisen. And right mindfulness, samasati, is to develop mindfulness of the mind. The Buddha has described 4 types of mindfulness in the Satipatthana Sutta of the Majjhima Nikaya, and that is to contemplate on the body, kaya anupassana, contemplate on feelings, vedana anupassana, contemplate on the mind, chitta anupassana, and contemplate on mind objects, that's dhamma anupassana. And right concentration, samma samadhi, and that is to meditate and develop the 4 deep mental absorptions called jhanas. And in the Noble Eightfold Path, with regard to concentration, Buddha suggested 4 jhanas. That's the first jhana, second jhana, third jhana, and fourth jhana. And of course, when we develop absorption states, the mental hindrances are suppressed and the positive factors called jhana factors develop. Now let us go to the third aspect of the Buddhist dispensation, and that's called the realization of the truth, Pativeda Sasana. And that is to gain the final result, the fruit of first learning and studying the doctrine and then putting it into practice. So the final result of the Buddhist practice is enlightenment or nibbana. And the enlightenment is gained in 4 stages. The first stage is stream enterer, Sotapanna. Second stage is once returner, Sakadagami. Third stage is non-returner, Anagami. And final enlightenment is at the stage of Arahant. And each of these 4 stages has 2 aspects, that is the path, the magga, and fruit, the phala. So altogether, there are 9 aspects to the final results of the Buddhist practice. That is path of stream entry, fruition of stream entry, path and fruition of one's returner, path and fruition of non-returner, then path of Arahant, fruit of Arahant, and finally Nibbana. So these 9 aspects called Navalokatara Dhamma is the result of the Buddhist practice of the Buddhist path of liberation. Now, during the process of gaining enlightenment, we have to eradicate certain mental defilements called fetters. And Buddha has described 10 such fetters, dasa sangojana. Now, these fetters are sort of chains or shackles that bind us to the cycle of birth and death, that's the samsara. And the 10 fetters are illusion of self, sakkaya ditthi, skeptical doubt, vicikiccha, attachment to rites and rituals, silabbata paramasa, sensual desire, kamaraga, ill will, patiga, desire to be born in fine material Brahma worlds, ruparaga, desire to be born in formless Brahma worlds, aruparaga, conceit, mana, restlessness, uddhacha, and ignorance, avijja. So the first stage of enlightenment, that's the stream enterer, the Sotapanna. The Sotapanna has entered the Noble Eightfold Path and has eradicated 3 of those fetters. The 3 first fetters, that is Sakkaya Ditthi, Vicikiccha, and Silabbata Paramas. And the Sotapanna person has also weakened the 3 unwholesome roots of greed, ill will, and delusion to such an extent a Sotapanna will not commit any unwholesome actions that will lead to a rebirth in any of the suffering worlds. And the Buddha has said a Sotapanna will attain enlightenment within a maximum of 7 births in the either human or in heavenly worlds. The second stage is one's return, or Sakadagami. So the Sakadagami person, in addition to eradicating the first 3 fetters, has weakened the next 2 fetters of sensual desire, kamaraga, and ill will, patiga. The Sakadagami person will be reborn only once more, either in human or heavenly world, before attaining full enlightenment. The third stage is non-returner, anagami. An anagami person has completely eradicated the lower 5 level fetters, and that is sakkaya ditthi, vicikiccha, silabbata paramasa, kamaraga, and patiga. An anagami person will not be reborn either in human or heavenly worlds. After death, an anagami person will be born in one of the 5 Brahma worlds called pure abodes, the Suddhavas, and they are Aviha, Atappa, Sudapsa, Sudapsi, and Akanita. And they will gain enlightenment in that Brahma world and attain Nibbana. And finally, the final stage of enlightenment is Arahant. And Arahant has completely eradicated all the mental defilements and fetters and has completed the Noble Eightfold Path. So an Arahant is fully enlightened and has attained Nibbana. And free from all the suffering, free from the cycle of birth and death, and will not be reborn again. And Nibbana, the Nibbana called Nivana, Ni means absence, vana means craving. So complete absence of craving. And in Nibbana, there's complete cessation of suffering, and there's no rebirth. All the mental defilements, including the unwholesome roots of greed, ill will, or delusion, are eradicated. And one can attain Nibbana in this life itself. One does not need to wait till after death. And it's been described as the supramundane state of ultimate happiness. The Nibbana, because it's supramundane, it cannot be explained in any conceptual language. And there are two types of Nibbana. The moment when one attains Nibbana, the person still has got those five aggregates until death. So that Nibbana is called Nibbana with residue, Saupadisesa Nibbana. And then Nibbana that's attained at the point of death with no residue of any aggregates is called Anupadisesa Nibbana. Three aspects of the Lord Gautama Buddha's dispensation, that's Gautama Buddha Sasana, theory of the Buddhist doctrine, Pariyatti Sasana, and putting the doctrine into practice, that's the Patipatti Sasana, and finally, the result, the fruit of the practice of the Buddhist doctrine, that's realization of the truth and enlightenment, Pativeda Sasana. All three are essential for us to cultivate the Buddhist path of liberation and attain Nibbana. The study of the Buddhist doctrine, the Buddhist theory, is essential for us to practice, and the practice is essential for us to gain the final liberation. Thank you very much.